Hey everyone, this is Tara with the Painted Cicada, and today we are painting mums and leaves. This is a really fun farmhouse flowers type painting, and somebody summed it up best on my Facebook page recently when they said it's so nice to see a fall painting that doesn't have pumpkins or sunflowers. And although I love pumpkins and sunflowers, I really love this Mums and Leaves painting, so I'm excited to walk you through it. If you've made it here, I know you have found the supply list and video link, but I'll walk through the supply list with you briefly. You can use a canvas, any size will work. I have tracers that will work for the smallest 8 by 10 and 9 by 12. I'm going to be painting on 11 by 14, so I've supplied a tracer for that as well. And I've also resized all the way up to 16 by 20. So you can use whatever tracer works for your size. As far as acrylic paint goes, as always, I like to say change up the colors to suit your preferences. But what I'll be using today is a bright yellow. I've actually got Hansa Yellow Light, but it's a nice bright yellow. Cobalt blue. And it's the one I'm using is called Primary Cyan, but any nice bright blue will work. That's for the background. I've got Phthalo Green, which is a nice dark bluish green. Yellow Oxide, which is just kind of a toned down yellow. White. I actually don't even have my white out. What is wrong with me? There we go. Oops. So white. One of my paints just jumped off the table there. A deep red. So I've got, this is just quinacridone red. I might add, this is just a deep gold color, so I might darken it a little bit with that, but I've got a nice deep red. And then raw umber. So that's what I'll be using. Of course, you can always add more colors, change the shades, change the tones, whatever you want to do based on what you have and what you like. As far as paintbrushes, I just recommend various sizes. I'll probably mostly be using a flat brush for the background. I will want a small brush for the mums and probably a medium brush for the leaves, but again, use what brushes feel comfortable for you. And then we're working with acrylic paint, so water, paper towels, a palette to put your paint on. A heat gun and hairdryer is always helpful to help speed along the process, but you can always just let it dry naturally. Feel free to pause the video at any point. You can rewind. If you work faster than I do, you can always change the speed. That's the beauty of YouTube. All right, so let's get started. What we're going to do before we ever put the design on is get this background situated. And so I want to create a horizon line, and so I'm going to kind of divide my canvas into thirds visually, and then I'm going to use a straight edge. You don't have to use a ruler, but you will want to keep it nice and straight, and then about a third of the way up. Let's see, and it doesn't have to be exact, so let's see, yeah, that's about a third. I'm just going to create a horizon line there. So the bottom part is going to become my table. The top part is just going to become the wall. And what we're going to do first, we will need on our palette some white and some of that cobalt blue. We're going to paint up the top of this wall. Now, of course, you can change the blue to any color you would like. This is your painting, but keep in mind the blue in this painting really pops up against the yellows, and so that's why I used blue If you are going to substitute, a purple would also pop really well. But let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to do, I've got a nice large flat brush. I've got my horizon line. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my blue, my nice bright blue, and I am going to add that all along the right side of my canvas here. And you can go over your horizon line just slightly, but don't leave a gap between the wall and the horizon line. Alright, so I'm just going to blend this out, spread that paint out a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of white, add more blue on my brush, and I'm going to create a streak with a little bit of that white in there. Just a little. And then I'm going to blend that out. I'm going to get a little more white, tap that on my canvas, dip back into my blue. And then I'm going to blend some of this white in there. So we're kind of creating a gradient going across. And it doesn't need to be a perfect gradient, but as we move farther to the left, we're going to add more and more white. So lots of white over here. Alright, so my darkest blue is on the right side. And I even maybe tap some more of that pure color right in there. My lightest blue is over there on the left. I've got my paint laid down. I'm going to wipe off my brush, and what I'm going to do is just kind of go in here and add in some paint strokes. Kind of blending this. I don't need a perfect blend. I like seeing the paint strokes in the background. I like that painterly effect. If that's not your thing and you want it well blended, you are welcome to blend it out. This is your painting. Make it however you'd like. Sometimes I even like to go in there and intentionally add paint strokes, but that's just me. Remember, this is your background. It's not going to be the focal point. Don't worry about perfection. We just want a blue gradient of some sort back there. And you can touch it up. Like, for example, I feel like I want just a little more lightness on this side. Alright, so that is what we're going to do for the top of the background. For the bottom, we're going to do kind of a similar effect, but we are going to use raw umber and white. So I'm going to get some raw umber on my palette here. Alright, so I'm going to start with a fairly clean brush. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to find my horizon line, make sure that's nice and straight. Oops. I say nice and straight and then I make it wobbly. Oh my gosh. Do as I say, not as I do. Nice straight horizon line. Okay. I'm going to fill the bottom here, going left to right with this raw umber. Once I get a nice smooth coat of that raw umber, I'm going to tap in some white in various areas. I'm going to wipe off my brush, and then I'm just going to pull that white back and forth. It's going to make a little bit of a streaky design. That is fine. Then I'm going to dip the raw umber back on my brush, and I'm going to repeat that process with raw umber. And I'm just going to repeat this process until I'm happy with my table design. So here's more white. A little bit of raw umber. And the trick with the table is not to blend out those streaks. We want it to look sort of like a wood grain. So that's what we're going for. Now, I have totally botched up my horizon line here, so I am just going to put my ruler down and fix that because I don't like that it's wobbly. All right, much better, nice and straight. All right. All right, so I'm going to get all the paint off my brush. Now we're at a step where we really want this background to be dry because we are going to transfer our image. So if you have a dryer or a heat gun, now's the time to use that. If you do not, pause the video and come back in about 5 minutes. Acrylic dries fairly quickly, so you should be ready to move on to the next step. So I'm going to pause, I'm going to dry this, and I will be right back. Okay, my painting is dry, so I'm ready to move on to the next step, which is drawing or transferring my image. We are working with fairly deep colors today, so I'm going to use chalk transfer, but you can also use carbon paper if you have that as well. And so what I'm going to do is just brush some chalk over the background of my tracer. And flip this baby over. Typically I would say line it up with your horizon line. Mine went a little higher than I had planned just because I didn't have that even. So you can place it kind of just central on your page. Now most of this design is really not that complicated. The hardest part, I think, to draw for most people is going to be this vase. Most of the rest of the design, as I designed it, you'll see there's just circles and then leaves kind of interspaced through there. So as long as you have kind of the placement marked out, the design elements themselves are not that difficult. So you can trace or transfer as much or as little as you want to. But really, we just want some circles and some leaves. They will become more mummy as we paint them in, obviously. All right, this is fairly light on my side, so I will go over it with a permanent marker just so you can see the design here. I'm not all actually that confident you'll be able to see my permanent marker, but we will make do. The important part is that you can see the design at home. Alright, so I have got my design transferred. Hopefully at this point you've got your design transferred. I can see it well enough that I will be able to paint this. And as you can see, it's basic circles, and then we've got some leaf shapes in there. The first thing that we're going to do, I'm going to put some of my bright yellow on my palette. And I'm going to get a medium to small brush. Let's see, I'll use this round. And I'm going to mix a little white in with my yellow here. That is going to help slightly with the opacity, but I still want it to be a nice bright color. And what I'm going to do is I am going to fill in the color on my oak leaves. So let's see, don't forget this little one down here. Got one here, and one here. Okay, so I'm just going to add a little white to my yellow, and then we are going to fill this these oak leaves in. And if your shape is slightly different from my shape, that is fine. I just kind of randomly drew these leaves, so remember that leaves come in all shapes. And this gives us a nice background layer for these leaves so that we can add some color and texture. Now yellows are naturally transparent pigments, so if you find that your blue is showing through a little bit, that's why we're adding the white, so you may need to add just a little more white. But also keep in mind that this is just the first layer for these leaves, so I'm not too worried about perfection here. Some of this is going to get covered up by the mums, and some of this is going to get a second layer. So I'm putting my paint on nice and thick, blocking out as much of that blue as I can, but also I'm not going to freak out about it if I see blue poking through. And as I'm painting, I'm using these tracer lines as a guide, but I'm not hyper focused on them. So if my leaves turn out a little different, I'm okay with that. This is supposed to be a fun fall painting. I'm not going for hyper realism here. Alright, next we're going to get some of this leaf color in there. I wiped off my brush. I don't need to rinse it because I'm actually using yellow in this step as well. So I'm going to get my phthalo green. And I am going to mix, let's say, 2 parts of this yellow with 1 part of this phthalo green. And we're going to see what color we come up with. That gives me a nice bright green. And I may add even a touch of white in there, but you can feel out the green that you have. The exact mixture is totally up to you, so I'm just going for a nice bright leaf green for the mum leaves. And sometimes for fun, you can even like dip in a little bit of yellow on your paintbrush. So I've got green and yellow on here so that it's not completely mixed. And then I'm going to paint my leaves. So and I really like having more than one color on my paintbrush, so I've got a lot of the green on there, and I'm just dipping a little bit into my phthalo, a little bit into my yellow, and that way my leaves just have a little variety in the color. All right, so we've got the leaves on there. Loving the different shades in the leaves. I'll actually lift this up to the camera so you can see. So having more than one color on the paintbrush just adds some fun dimension to those leaves, the green leaves. But now I'm going to add another layer on these yellow leaves. So if your yellow leaves are not dry yet, you're going to want to hit them with your dryer or give them a few minutes to dry. So I am going to pause the video and come back when mine are dry. Alright, so I mentioned that we were going to add a second layer to these yellow leaves here. And so I'm going to get some more of my yellow. And I'm not going to mix it with another color at this point. I'm going to use the pure yellow. And I'm going to get my brush here. I'm going to make sure all the green is out of it. Or you can use another brush. But I am going to add some water. And I'm going to thin down this yellow. So this is yellow right from the tube. And I'm going to thin it down. So nice, thin, and watery. And we're going to create a wash over this yellow here just to brighten it up a little bit. And we still have some layers to do. And I'm just adding this right over the top of that white yellow mixture that we did earlier. And so this is transparent, but it's going to add a little more vibrancy to this first layer of the leaves. Okay, the next step we're going to do is start painting these mums. So for the mums, you need 3 colors on your palette. We are going to have yellow oxide, we are going to have your bright yellow, and I am actually all out of that bright yellow, so I need to grab another paint color. So yellow oxide, bright yellow, and white. And what I'm going to use for this step is you want a bright brush, an angle brush, or a flat brush, and that's how we are going to make these strokes. The first thing I'm going to do is mark the center of my flowers. So I'm just going to take a little paint and go through, and you want to mark where your center will be. If your center is behind the leaf, just leave it empty. So all of these flowers except for one right here is facing us. All right. So I did that with my yellow oxide. Now what I'm going to do, let's see, we'll start with the flower up here at the tippy top. We'll work top down. I'm going to mark my 12 o'clock my 3 o'clock, my 6 o'clock, and my 9 o'clock. And what I'm going to do is with just the very thin part of the brush, I'm going to push down and pull towards the center. And once I have those, I'm just going to kind of cut these sections in half and continue that same process, filling in those sections. So those are small, smooth streaks. With the exception of where the mum goes underneath the leaves or another flower, you're going to want to go beyond your circle that you created so that you hide your tracer line. And what you end up with is something like this. And we're going to repeat that process for all of the mums except for this one right here, which is hiding under that leaf. So just divide that circle into sections. And then start filling it in, going beyond the circle line. We're doing this with the yellow oxide. And we just pull towards our center. Now you have to be cautious where you have mums that go behind the leaves. So for example, this one goes behind this green leaf here, and so I have to kind of be cautious where the edge is right there. But it is up to you where you decide which ones go over and which ones go under. So for example, this one here, I'm going to create these three. This top right side here, I'm going to have behind the leaf, but down here at the bottom, I'm going to have it over the leaf. And this large one here, I'm going to have it go over everything, and then this flower will be in front. So I can go ahead and pull all four sides of this mum inward. This one here, I'm going to have the top three be on top, and then down here this yellow leaf is going to be over. So this flower will be on top of everything this way. but at the bottom will be behind. And each mum is going to have 3 layers, so don't worry too much if you can see some of that blue. The important part here is that we're setting the shape. In areas like right here where I know it's behind, you can just fill that in with the color for now. And then down here at the edge, that's really where you need your brush strokes to look like petals. This one here is behind my leaf, so I'm just going to pull. I'm going to pretend where my center is, set my design, and then I'm going to pull everything towards that center and just stop at the edge of the leaf. This one here just goes over the top, so I'm going to pull all my pieces towards the center. Alright, I am going to start working right here on this one that I said is sideways. And so for this one, we are going to pull upward here. So we are going to make the center right here, and all of these pieces are just going to kind of radiate out from that center area. I will lift this up towards the camera so you can see better what I mean. Okay, so instead of having a round circle here, I have pulled these up towards the top edge of that flower so that this is the point at which everything radiates, because that flower is sideways, if that makes sense. And then this one here is just on top. And then I've got one more flower in the back here. Again, I'm just going to visualize where that center is, and then I'm going to let the leaf stay on top. Oops, dipped in the wrong color there. All right, so this is step 1 for those mums. Step 2, I'm going to wipe off my brush, and I'm going to do the exact same process, except this time I'm going to dip in my yellow, my bright yellow. So you'll probably want to start with the flowers that are in the background first, but work however you are comfortable. With this second color, I'm going to add just a few less of my petals, and they're going to be slightly smaller. So I'll show you on this one here. I'm going to let around all the edges, I'm going to let that yellow oxide be my guide. So I'm just going to go slightly smaller and then pull in with the yellow. So I don't want to completely hide that yellow oxide. So these yellow petals are just a little bit smaller, a little bit fewer petals, so that we can still see some of the yellow oxide underneath. And we just go through all of our flowers the exact same way. And mums are one of my favorite flowers to paint. They really are just super easy to paint, and I love how they're layered, and I love fall colors anyway, so these are like super fun for me. And we do have more layers to add to the leaves, so don't stress out if if you get confused by the layers of which leaves are on top and which are underneath the flowers. We can fix that to some extent in a later step. And I always say don't forget your flower at the bottom, and I always forget that one at the bottom. So I need to go back and add my yellow oxide down here, and then come back through with my second layer of yellow. All right, and for your third layer, you have a choice to make. You can either use pure white or you can use a mixture of white and yellow. I like to yellow up my white just a pinch for this third layer, but it's totally your call. And then we just do the exact same process, pulling in towards the center. And again, we just go a little shorter, a little fewer petals on this third layer. All right, now of course we're going to come back in a later step. We're going to add centers to those flowers. But for now we're going to move on. All right, so for the next step, I'm going to get my red and put it on my palette. And I've got two reds. I have one a little darker than the other. But we just want a nice deep red. Whichever you use is fine. So I'm going to dip into my phthalo green just a tiny bit, just a pinch. And then I'm going to dip into my deep red. And that is going to kind of brown up that green a little bit. That's difficult to see on camera. It just kind of looks black, but you'll see if I add a little white to it. It's just kind of a toned down green, okay? And what we're going to do with this is I'm going to get some of this on my brush. I'm going to wipe it off so that I just have a little bit of pigment. And then wherever my leaves kind of come behind the flowers, I'm just going to pull in a little bit of shadowing with this dry brush. So kind of just pulling it in and adding a little darkness where the shadow would be. Just a little. You don't need a lot. And that's why I'm using this kind of dry brush technique, so I put a little on my brush, wipe it off. That's my dog sneezing. It's a cute sneeze, I think. But I'm just pulling a little shadow in. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, Eddie. Pulling a little shadow where my leaf is darker. So all of these leaves that come out from underneath the flower, I'm just using this barely any no paint on my brush and kind of tapping it in there just to create a little bit of darkness and dimension. And then with the same dark color, I'm just going to pull a little vein up through the leaf. And you don't even have to have a full vein here, just the impression of one will make it leafy. And if there are any parts of your leaves, your green leaves, that you feel need to be a little lighter, you can always just mix up a little light green and then kind of use that same dry brush technique to pull some of that light green in on parts where it needs a little contrast between the dark and the light. Totally up to you. All right, now we are going to add second layer to our leaves. So I'm gonna mix this red up just so it's one color. You will have your nice deep red. All right. So what we're going going to do for these leaves is we want to mix up the colors, a little bit of orange, a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow. All right, so what I'm going to do is I need some, shoot, what did I do with my yellow? Oh, right here, I've got plenty of yellow. All right, so I've got red, I'm going to have yellow, and I am going to pull some red and yellow and mix them together, and I'm going to make an orange. So I'm going to have these three colors here on my palette. And you can mix whatever, you know, shade of orange you like. I'm just using what I have left over. All right, and I'm going to start with this leaf on the bottom just to kind of show you what I'm doing. So we're just going to add a little color on this leaf. So we already have the basic shape. So what I'm going to do, so I have my orange on my brush already because I was mixing it. So I am going to tap in orange in maybe, let's say, 3 places. I'm going to tap in a little bit of red, and then I'm going to tap in some yellow. I'm going to wipe off my brush, and then I'm just going to come back through and then tap these colors out, and I'm going to let them kind of blend and mix and do whatever they want to do, just kind of tapping and moving all over this leaf. And by doing this, it allows some of these colors to blend, some stay more pure. And that's how we're going to do that. So let me lift this up. So you can see I've got a little red, a little orange, a little yellow. And you can do this however you want. So you can have your leaves darker, you can have them lighter. You can even mix in a little bit of your burnt umber if you have some of that. You can refer to the picture that's on the supply list, but really, guys, the sky is the limit with these leaves. Do not feel like you have to do like I do. You don't have to use the same colors I do. Really, the only requirement to make this look right is fall colors. If you stick within your fall colors scheme, your leaves will look super cool. So let's see, let me do this one here. So it's just a matter of tapping in some different colors, and then I'm wiping off my brush. So I've got my colors right here on this leaf, and then I just kind of stamp it out with my brush here. And you want to work one leaf at a time because you don't want to put down your colors and then have them kind of just dry in spots. You want to be able to blend them out. And there's no right or wrong, so like for this one I went back in and I added a little bit of brown. That leaf is more brown. I'm going to do this leaf here and I'm going to have it be a little more red. You just have to be a little careful of where you start and stop, because remember, some of these leaves are behind the background that we had previously, or the flowers that we put on here previously. And keep in mind, your leaves are going to be different from my leaves. And my version this time around is going to be different from my sample. No two fall leaves are ever the same. Their colors change differently. Their shapes are slightly different. There's always variation. So that is something you definitely need to keep in mind when you're working with natural things like flowers and leaves, is that there's always variation, and that's beautiful and that's okay. So we repeat this step for all of our leaves. And the one thing as you're working through this that you do want to keep in mind is that we do have a lot of yellow color in the mums, and so you may want to avoid having too much yellow in your leaves. So I have finished all my leaves, and I'm just going to kind of step back and look over them, see which ones I need to tone down a little, add a second layer if needed of this color, just tapping it in. All right around this point, your leaves are going to look something like this. Now these, because we're using very little paint and tapping it out, should be fairly dry, but before I move on to the next step, I want them to be completely dry. So I am going to dry my painting and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, so my leaves are dry, and what I'm going to do now is create another wash over these leaves. And so for the wash, I am going to take my orange, maybe add a little bit of brown to it and some water. I want to just create a nice thin brownish orange color and turn it into a wash, just like we did with the yellow earlier. And the key to this is thin, right? We want transparent. This is a wash, not a thick paint layer. So nice and thin. And then just to kind of unify these leaves, I'm going to pull that wash over the leaf. And anywhere that that is yellow, it's going to tone down the yellow a little bit, but it's also going to make the leaf look a little more blended. And you can also fix the edges and the shape of that leaf during this step as well. And you did a lot of work on these leaves, so remember the key here is creating a wash. Thin layer of paint so that you can still see all those beautiful colors underneath. All right, now I'm going to get a nice thin liner brush, and I am going to mix some of my deep red with a bit of my raw umber. And I'm going to pull the veins into the leaf. So I always, with any leaf, I'm going to start with my main vein right down the middle, and then you can pull veins into each little segment. And I actually don't worry too much, you know, if my paint thins or lifts, but we're just giving these leaves more detail here. And you can add as many details as you want in these veins. I don't go too crazy. Alright, so for the next step, we are going to do these flower centers. So I'm going to use raw umber. And what I'm going to do is get my round brush, clean and dry. I'm going to dip the raw umber in the centers of my flowers, wherever I can see the centers. So some of these centers might be behind other things, so I won't be able to see this one. I won't be able to see this one. It's behind the leaf. Can't see that one. It's behind the leaf. And then I'm going to come back and with your deep red, get some of that on the brush. And everywhere you have that burnt umber, we're just going to smear in a little bit of that Venetian red. And then just for a little highlight, what I like to do is use the end of a brush. I'm going to dip in white, dip in red, and then I'm just going to add a little white dot to the centers here. So dip in white, dip in red, dot, dot, dot. It just adds a little highlight in there. Alright, now I'm going to go back to my chiseled brush, so either a flat, an angle, or a bright. And we are going to paint these flower stems. Alright, so the first part of the stem is fairly dark, so I'm going to use phthalo green. And a bit of raw umber. So this is going to be the shadowy side of these stems. And then, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got about 10 flowers, so you want to pull in about 10 stems. The truth is, your eye is not going to count the stems, but we've got several flowers in there, so we just want to make sure we have quite a few stems. And then we need some highlights on the stems. So with the same brush, I have leftover green from earlier. Let's see if I have enough. If not, mix some phthalo green with some yellow. I think I do have enough here. So it's just a phthalo green and white, or I'm sorry, phthalo green and yellow mixture. I'm going to use that nice thin edge and pull a highlight right down the center of every stem that I just made. And the very last step that we need to do is this glass. And this is a dry brush technique with white, so I'm going to clean off my brush. And then what I'm going to do is dip into some nice clean white, wipe it off on my paper towel. Let's see. I am going to pull the edges of my glass first to get my shape. The less paint you have on your brush, the better. So at first, let's get our edge. Once you have your edges, I am just going to pull some, let's see, white in there. Again, dry brush technique, so hardly anything on this brush. So I can kind of pull in a streak and then smear it out. Pull in a streak, smear it out. I'm just adding a little haze here and there with that dry brush. All right, once you have that haze, what we're going to do is just pull in some lines. So I'm going to put some paint over here on my paper towel and kind of wipe it out so that I hardly have anything on my brush. And then right here in the center, I'm going to create a slight line upward and then a slight line downward. And then I'm going to create a triangle. So I'm going to do that again here. That's our water line. Okay. And then we need to do that again at the very bottom. So I'm going to pick a point. So I've got my triangle, or my diamond, I guess, up here. And then I'm going to pick a a spot down here at the bottom, and we need to make another matching one at the bottom because that is the base. And then we've blended a lot of those lines out. I'm going to add just a few more highlight lines in there. Wipe off my brush, and then a little more smudging at the bottom where the water would be. So that's underneath that triangle, or that diamond. Sorry, I keep calling it a triangle. I should know my shapes, right? So what we end up with is more white smudging here at the base of the vase. That's where the water is. A little less up here, and most of what's going on at the top is vertical because it's mimicking the sides of that vase. But you can kind of play with it and just feel it out. I might add a little more haziness around the edges. That is it, my friends. Everything from here on out are just finishing touches, so mine will be different from yours. For example, I feel like I need a little bit more red in the center of these flowers, so I might come back through and just add a little bright red in there. But yeah, that is Mums and Leaves. So I cannot wait to see what you create. This is one of my favorite paintings this month. So thank you so much for joining me. I can't wait to see what you create. I'd love to invite you to my group Painted Cicadas Art and Share if you have not already joined. And show me your Mums and Leaves. I cannot wait to see it. Thank you so much, and I will see you again. Bye-bye, everybody.